Good morning and welcome to everybody to the Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee of Tuesday the 19th of November, and welcome particularly to any residents who may be watching now or at some point in the future. My name's Alistair Neil, I'm Councillor Neil, the chair of the meeting, and as we go through the meeting I'll be asking individual speakers to just introduce themselves at the point that they first speak. So thank you for everybody if you'd be kind enough to do that. And yeah, as the snow begins to land outside, the reminder that the winter chill is in the air. Hopefully wherever you are, you're a little bit warmer than that. But we'll make a start, and apologies for absence. I think we have Robert, perhaps you could update.
Yeah, we have Councillor Bond with Councillor McConnell substituting, Councillor Garrick with Councillor Murphy substituting, and also Councillor Garrett sent his apologies as well.
Thank you. And I would also note with Councillor Murphy standing in for Councillor Buckler, we also, from Planning Committee, we also have Councillor Powell from the Planning Committee joining us. Thank you, Councillor Powell, for that. And I believe we also have Councillor Riley and Councillor Bryn online who will be also joining us. And welcome to all of you online from bringing your experience from the Planning Committee. Moving on to declarations of interest. I know of none. Robert? Thank you. And item 3, the public open forum. Robert?
No one today, Chair.
Thank you. So we'll move straight on to what is an extremely important report. We'll be making the normal assumption that we make, which is that the members of the committee have read the reports and the attachments, and be asking officers and the cabinet member to make comments about the reports on the basis that we will have already read those. It's a really important report. It deals with such important issues about school exclusions and about the nature of the challenges that exist not only for Monmouthshire but much more widely, but how we're dealing with them and how our schools are dealing with them. And ultimately this is all about the learners and their life chances and how exclusions might affect them in one way or another. So there's so much tied up with it. Thank you, Councillor Gruckup, as Cabinet Member, for joining us, and it may be that you want to start with comments and then move on to officer colleagues.
Thank you very much for that indulgence, Chair. My name is Martin Groker. I'm the Cabinet Member for Education. Firstly, could I thank members who attended the seminar on this topic the other afternoon. There was an excellent turnout, and I think it just shows the importance that members give to this topic, and the nature of comments and questions were of a high calibre, I thought. And so I'd like to publicly thank officers who carried the can on that occasion, leaving me to get off quite lightly. As indeed, colleagues, I hope to today. I think the first thing is that we're coming now from a much stronger foundation in our analysis of why children are excluded from schools, and that means we're able to do more about it. And I think that underpins the approach that we're trying to take. It is not satisfactory just to say they are naughty boys and girls and they should be kicked out of school. No children, I believe, are evil, and very few children are genuinely naughty by nature. So we need to be able to see what it is to support our schools, and please don't interpret for 1 second those comments as meaning schools should have to put up with terrible behaviour. That's not what I'm suggesting for 1 minute. But what we do need to do is to try to find out what is causing that behaviour, and then to support schools in trying to address that. And I think one thing is clear, and that is we are only just beginning to see the impact of the pandemic on the life chances and the lifestyles of our young people in schools. Because it's quite clear that in Monmouthshire as in every other local council area, there has been a rise in exclusions based mainly around behaviour since the pandemic. And that manifests itself in all sorts of ways, of which school exclusion is just one. So there has been a rise, and let me be quite honest and say that in Monmouthshire there are now more children excluded from school than at any other time in the history of the county. And again, I doubt there will be a local council anywhere in Britain where their cabinet member for education couldn't put his hand up and say that's the case. So we're in a difficult position. In Monmouthshire, we have tried to respond in a positive way, and so our fairly newly established inclusion service is on the ball. And we have now an education support team working with schools who are under pressure. There are just a couple of points to clarify where responsibilities lie with exclusion. There is only one person who can exclude a child from school, and that's the head teacher of that school. It is not the responsibility of the local authority, but we do have responsibilities to ensure that schools operate within the Welsh Government guidelines around exclusion, and then, of course, to work and support those children and their families when they are excluded. Because when you look at the statistics, they are very uncomfortable, and there are some days when they weigh very heavily on me. Because when you look at those young people who are excluded, they are far more likely to be vulnerable children, far more likely to have additional learning difficulties, far more likely to have problems with regular attendance at school than the majority of our young people. And so it's just another difficulty that they are facing as they go through school. And I would like to remind you that our corporate plan, when it's looking at education, talks about giving every child the best possible start in life. So we're trying to balance difficult behaviour and other reasons why children are excluded from schools with their right to be educated and to get the very best out of school that they can, with the rights of all the other children in that school who are having to learn while disruption is going on sometimes around them. So this is one huge problem. I think that through our inclusion service that we have set up, through our education support team that we have set up, through our pupil referral service, which we have strengthened, we are doing our best to support these children and their schools. But I am absolutely in awe of those people like my colleagues here who actually make it their professional day-to-day responsibilities. And I would ask you to put most of their questions, unless they're of a political nature, to them, because I walk in awe of what they are trying to achieve. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Grucka, and a really helpful introduction. Just before Marwen and Kiva move into picking out some of the key points from the report, could I just observe there are an awful lot of acronyms in the report. When I started, I just started noting down a few. There's PX, FTEs, there's ALNETs, there's PSPs, there's SEMHs, PDCs, ESTs, ASEs, AKNs, ALNs, FSMs, I can't even read my writing on that one, CYP, PRUs, PR, you get the point. Let's not talk in acronyms for the purpose of any residents looking. And actually, a small request in something that's much more important than this small request that we get into the report itself. it would be very helpful just to have, when there are a lot of acronyms, just to have a little, guide to the acronyms somewhere at the bottom of a report, because otherwise people are flicking back all the time to see what they are. But much more important it is that we get into the report itself. If you could just bear that in mind. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. And yeah, absolutely. In education, we do love an acronym. I'm Dr. Morwenna Wagstaff. I'm Head of Service for Inclusion in Monmouthshire County Council. And as Martin has said so very kindly, I still feel that we're relatively new to the structure. So I've been in post just over 2 years now. And I welcome the opportunity this morning to update members and any residents who are listening about the use of exclusions within our Monmouthshire schools during the last academic year. I also wanted to extend my thanks, as Martin has already, to all those members who did attend our seminar last week. We were delighted at the level of attendance and commitment that members gave, and we hope that we added to the kind of supplementing of the information of what is actually a really complex issue. And I know Martin's done a really helpful introduction to this. I will take it that everybody has read and accessed the report, but I was just going to kind of highlight a few points, and then both myself and my colleague Kiva would be welcome any questions. So as Martin has highlighted, our levels of exclusions are up within Monmouthshire, both for fixed term exclusions and permanent exclusions. And this is of concern, obviously, to us, because we want our children to be in school. Incidents and issues linked to exclusions and the presentation of behaviour that challenges or concerns within our schools and settings are being noted regionally and nationally. And I think, as Martin has alluded to, some of that is being considered a response to the pandemic. So some of the background that's provided in the report highlights the way that within Monmouthshire we have tightened up, we have improved our systems for recording and reporting, which has led to an improved accuracy of our data across the local authority. And again, Martin has already mentioned that that has allowed a deeper depth of analysis and understanding of the reasons leading to exclusions for lots of learners. I've already mentioned the impact of the pandemic. We're not blaming everything on the pandemic, but we do note that the increase in secondary schools in persistent disruptive behaviour in the classroom, and then in the younger learners, that perhaps the pandemic caused them to miss key kind of stages of their development, because obviously lots of learners were at home. So those critical stages of child development may have had a significant impact for some of our learners. And also to note, financial pressures within our school system currently can impact on the availability of additional staff, or the availability of provision that some of our learners need, or just a bit more of a level of challenge to meet some of the needs that we are being presented with, which particularly around behaviours that place children and learners at risk of exclusion. So fixed term exclusion, so that's when a child is excluded for a period of time. I think the average in Monmouthshire over the last academic year was for 1.5 days, but that can typically range from kind of a half day to a much longer period of time. Those rates having increased over the last 2 years, and that's reflected in the report. And again, the suggestion that this, particularly in secondary, may be due to the kind of post-COVID reintegration and reacclimatising to kind of formal school routines and boundaries that are being put in place within our secondary schools. And in primary schools, we have also noted that rise in the use of fixed-term exclusions, and some of the analysis of the reasons behind that include things like damage to property and causing injury to pupils or staff. Again, just highlighting, a suggestion is that some of these younger learners have missed those vital behaviour, communication and self-regulation development opportunities due to the pandemic, which has led in some instances to more disruptive behaviour and challenges within schools. As Martin has also noted, our rate of permanent exclusions within our schools and settings has also had an increase. And And as Martin has highlighted, the report highlights that although we have a role in the monitoring and the use of the exclusions across the local authority, the decision to exclude a learner sits with the head teacher. And we were really fortunate last week in our seminar to have one of our head teachers come as a representative to explain and add some context to the school position around the use of exclusions, which again highlighted the complexities that surround it and the real kind of challenges for a head teacher when faced with that decision. So our responsibility within the local authority is to monitor the use of exclusions, to provide that support and challenge to our schools, to ensure that there is a parity of approach and that the process around exclusion and the thresholds are in line with the Welsh Government's guidance around that. Martin has thankfully highlighted as well a significant change in approach over the last couple of years is the use of our education support team, and we welcome that as something that was supported by Monmouthshire Local Authority because that is a preventative model to try and engage with learners in the primary phase where they are presenting with behaviours of challenge or concern and therefore the risk of exclusion. And the aim is that this team work closely with the school, the child and their families and any other agencies to kind of increase the awareness of the needs, any strategies that need to be put in place for often some very vulnerable children to try and reduce the levels of dysregulation and therefore the risk associated. Within the broad inclusion service, we have an ongoing and commitment to preventative work through a very broad professional learning offer. And again, we talked a little bit about that last week. But it's acknowledging while that kind of preventative work is ongoing, the rise in instance of the high-risk behaviours in schools does put that continued pressure on our pupil referral service that Martin has alluded to. We are strengthening that service as we speak. And again, thanks to Monmouthshire for kind of listening to those needs and the requirement to strengthen that service, because as a learner, particularly when they become permanently excluded, the local authority still has an obligation to provide education, and we call an acronym Education Other Than at School, so EOTUS, through the Pupil Referral Service. So that obligation to provide the statutory education for all of these children who experience exclusion remains a local authority responsibility, and one we take really seriously because these are some of our most vulnerable young people. So just to kind of pull together, the report highlights some of the areas of focus, which include our commitment to reducing the levels of exclusion and reducing the barriers to learning for vulnerable groups, as outlined in the Community and Corporate Plan, and to ensure the delivery of a truly inclusive education system. We acknowledge that the use of exclusion is a legitimate and sometimes needed mechanism by which head teachers ensure the safety of their learners and their staff. But as a local authority, we have to ensure that suitable balance between supporting schools where learners' needs can't be met in mainstream school and ensuring that our schools remain inclusive. We've got a huge commitment to inclusive practice and continue to work with schools to make sure that they can meet that range of needs. And as Martin has highlighted, that includes vulnerable pupils with barriers to learning and those with additional learning needs. We'll continue to monitor and analyse the data to understand the changes and the presentation and try to be proactive and preventative where we can, and to ensure that the support and the provision is sufficient for our learners, all of our learners, and that wherever possible we can be preventative and proactive with our learners, their families, the schools and any other agencies and partners to mitigate the impact of the use of exclusion on our learners. So that is a very brief summary. I hope you have all read the report, and obviously both myself and Kiva McDermott, the Vulnerable Learner Lead, will answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Marwan. Just before we open to questions, just for clarification, in the table at 5.2, which is the table summarising the instances of fixed-term exclusions at and days lost during the last 3 years, which itemises it by number through primary, secondary, and total. 5.3 is it begins to describe what that table represents. And the number used of learners excluded in 5.3 is 520, whereas the instances shown in the previous year is very different to that. Could you just explain, what is that due to the repetitive, but perhaps you'd explain.
Yes, thank you, and sorry. There's so much data we could include in these reports. Yeah, so absolutely. So the table in 5.2 refers to instances. So an instance of a fixed term exclusion could be as small as half a day, but it could equally be up to 15 days. And as I stated before, the average in Monmouthshire, it was 1.5 days. So some of our learners have the use of repeat fixed term exclusion. So I think 5.3 highlights that we had 520 learners who experienced exclusions last year. And I think somewhere here it said, there we go, 289 of these learners received repeat exclusions. So it's the same child who's been excluded for a period of time on a number of occasions, and obviously we've got the detail around the analysis of that, but that's kind of to highlight that, yeah, some of these learners could be the same child having repeat exclusions, but in some instances it might be a child just has half a day exclusion and then nothing else for the rest of the year. So there's a real kind of detail and granularity to the exclusion data. So yeah, has that helped?
No, that's really helpful. So it would be correct to look at the 520 and say that equates to 1,810 instances.
Yes.
And those two numbers are effectively the same individuals, just repeat instances,
yes,
which are clearly multiple repeats in some cases, not
yes,
just once.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for just clarifying that. That's very helpful. Opening to questions, and Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I'm going to ask this question because it's a question that's very often asked of me. And you very substantially answered it already, Moana. It's about the pandemic, and the question is this asked of me, so don't shoot the messenger here, is just for how long are we going to blame the pandemic for everything which is going on? It's the one place you go to every single time, but it's the pandemic. Now, let's be a little bit more constructive. Of course, there's been a big problem associated with the pandemic. Do you think it's just going to be a generational thing, or do you think it's more lasting? You know, what's the core problem there? You've explained an awful lot about the effects of that problem, but you know, just what is that reason for going back to the pandemic and blaming it all the time?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Murphy. And as an educational psychologist, I'm sort of fascinated and can probably write a whole thesis on this. I think for me, I think collectively the pandemic was a traumatic experience for all of us. It was anxiety-provoking for all of us. And I think when we talk about adverse childhood experiences, we have collectively, societally, but actually globally, experienced something that was very traumatic, particularly at the beginning of it. We didn't know how it was going to unfold. We were scared for our loved ones. Children lived through that, obviously at different stages of their development, and depending on the kind of the protective factors within their lives, so that could be a multitude of factors, the balance of risk and protective factors. So risks would be those additional factors for some children, perhaps poverty, we knew it was an impact, perhaps domestic violence, being around parents who were ill or unwell or stressed, all of the losing family members, being bereaved, having those illnesses. So we talk about resilience and we talk about the balance of risk and protective factors. And for some children at key points of their development, that would have been experienced in a very traumatic way. And the impact of that is different depending on the age of the child, but for very young children, we know that the impact of trauma or adverse childhood experiences can actually affect brain development and the way that children respond then to environment stimulus later in life, and the way that they can engage with learning. So I think depending on the age and the stage, different children had different experiences, and not all of those were negative, I have to say. I know that there were some positives, but I think for our younger children, at the crucial time in their development, perhaps they didn't have access to social skills development, sort of emotional development. They might have been in a household that was very anxiety-provoking or quite scary at times. Equally for older children, that transition time when you're developing your friendship skills and you're learning how to behave around other young people of a similar age, that was disrupted for some children. And equally, we weren't in the classroom. The expectations of how you behave, you know, you come in, you sit down quietly, you get on with your work, as an example. We weren't doing that with our children. Our children, I've got 3 children, my children were at home learning a bit on laptops, watching a bit of telly, you know, whatever. So I think then it's coming back in and almost questioning those things. I was all right for a few years. I was learning at home and I've done all right. Why do I now need to come and, you know, adhere to what you're asking me to do? So I think it's hugely complex. I hope it's not something that is just going to, as you say, be a response forever. But I do think that for some children, particularly more vulnerable children and families, I think the impact was significant at crucial parts of development, particularly around social, emotional, you know, awareness and sort of regulation, I guess. So I will stop talking because I could go on forever. Has that sort of answered the question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, but so hopefully it'll phase out.
I hope so. I think we talk that we've hit a peak. It would be nice to think that we're hitting a peak, that we're seeing this played out now, and that actually with our schools holding their systems and structures firmly and being fair and consistent with our children, young people and their families, that you know, we can re-establish some of those situations. But I think for some children where maybe that trauma was acute, you know, that could have had a long-lasting impact for them. But it's very difficult to pick that apart as a general sort of... but yeah, for very many, most of our children, I would imagine we will recover because they've got lots of protective factors around them. School is a very protective factor for most children. But there will be some, I think, who will be affected for a very long time to come, is my assumption.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you.
Mariah, just to test that a little bit, we're looking a little later in the agenda at the community and corporate plan performance, and in the I think the Fair Place section where there is a description of an update of school attendance, and there's a similar kind of wraparound of the impact of the pandemic. We're familiar with this problem, but in terms of school attendance, particularly in the group which are entitled to free school meals, it's now pretty much exactly 1 in 4 learners at any given day are not at school, and that number is increasing. So it's not, you know, we all want the problem to improve, but just to gently challenge the idea that we've peaked and that we have any certainty around that. At the same time, we know that schools have had to reduce the number of support staff in place in many schools, and they may have to do more of that given budgetary challenges that they face. Have we any reason to believe that that number is not only sticking, but actually potentially becoming worse?
I think it's a really interesting question, and I think my words were, I hope it's peaked, just to clarify. But yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, we spend a lot of time, slightly aside from the exclusion, within the inclusion team, working with children who have what we class as emotionally based school avoidance, and that again is a hugely complex issue and could be for a range of reasons. But what we definitely have is evidence to suggest that since the pandemic, those numbers have increased. increased. I think, again, children who had a number of years being educated at home or could, were at home, we were forced to be at home, are now looking on, in some instances, I'm not generalising, are looking at school as a really difficult place to return to. It's busy, it's noisy, they might have specific needs, and I think there is a slight sort of idea that, well, we were educated at home, so why do I, and I'm just sort of a generalisation, but there's that kind of, the attitude towards school and schooling was fundamentally changed by the pandemic. And I think for some families and some learners, the understanding of the why you need to go back into a school building and access your education in that manner, when for a few years it was okay for us to kind of have, online bespoke virtual learning, I think has been really difficult. And for some children, there is a small population where actually they preferred that learning style because of their perhaps complex needs or barriers to learning or additional learning needs or family situation. And again, it's that kind of reacclimatization of returning to school. So we've seen that increase around the emotionally based school avoidance. We've also seen an increase in our EOTAS population, which is our education other than at school for reasons due to mental health and emotional needs, particularly around children being too anxious to attend school. So I don't know if we're going to see those children suddenly recover and be able to return to school in the short term. Our hope would be that that is possible, or that we can enable them, because they're typically in the secondary phase of school at the moment, we can enable them to move on to positive post-school options and prevent them from becoming NEET, so not in education, employment or training, which obviously would enhance their capacity to contribute and be a active part of our community and society. Is that...
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. It's I guess the concern that we all have, that it may have created some new norms, and that they may not be temporary, that we probably none of us can know. But moving on, and thank you for that. It's very helpful. I have Councillor Strong.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, to echo the comments about the value of the members' seminar that we had last week, and thanks for concern with that. Particular thanks to the secondary head who was prevailed upon to come along. He raised a lot of interesting points, not least the one that the new curriculum is giving him a degree of flexibility to provide a curriculum that might be more appropriate to some of the pupils that we're talking about. As a teacher who spent many years teaching in the context of what I think was over-rigid national curriculum of the past, I find that really pleasing. But we still have a big problem. It's highlighted amongst elsewhere in 510, the chart of permanent exclusions. 20 in our secondary schools in the last year, an average of 5 per school, which is way above anything in my experience when I was teaching. But of course, the average hides differences. In the members' seminar, that was broken down into the 4 secondary schools. They were anonymised. We didn't know which was which, and I understand why. Why that document isn't here today in front of us. When numbers are very low, it's possible to identify individuals, and that would not be appropriate. And also, as you pointed out in the seminar, the figures hide very different stories. A high level of exclusions might, in a sense, be good news if it's short term. It might be a school that's had problems, which is now robustly dealing with them. It might, on the other hand, be a school that's slipping into problems. And without the stories, the figures don't actually mean much. However, we're here as Scrutiny, and I do wonder whether it would not be legitimate for us as a committee to have access to which school is which, and the stories behind them, if necessary, in closed session. I'm not asking for that today, but I'm just wondering if for future that is something that we ought to have in front of us as a scrutiny committee, so that we can understand, and we can also, to a degree, reassure our own residents of what's going on in our schools, which we aren't always told. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. Who wants to pick that up?
Would you like? So I'm Kiva McDermott, Vulnerable Learner Lead. I report into Morwenna. Exclusions is part of my remit. It's a big part, but it's part of the remit. So I suppose the first thing that I would say is that by the nature of the reporting, our data is from last year. In terms of reassurance to everybody, including myself, this time last year we had 7 permanent exclusions. This year, currently, we do not have any. So in terms of the way that we work with each of those schools, there are various checks and balances in place. One of the checks and balances is the Pupil Disciplinary Committee meeting, chaired by the governors of the school, the PDC. That's a statutory committee. They scrutinise that sort of tier of the threshold and the propriety of those exclusions. Parents have the right to an independent appeal in those cases as well, if it's upheld by the governing body. The local authority, and often it's me that attends those meetings, goes as a public servant, knowing that there's a risk of judicial review if the Welsh Government guidance isn't adhered to and that threshold's not met. So that level of scrutiny happens, but also because we were concerned at the high level of exclusions last year, we carried out an audit with a counterpart local authority to review anonymised instances of those permanent exclusions, and in each of the cases that we looked at, the threshold was considered to be met. So lots of that work has been going on, and indeed last year, at that point in time, by half-term last year, many of the exclusions related to one school, but many of them related to one specific incident at the school. And again, those processes, the PDC and the audit looked at those, as well as at officer level, governor level and head teacher level. So there are lots of checks and balances. I'm sure in terms of looking at the detail in a further forum, a closed forum, that could be available. But overall and transparently, there are lots of measures that are in place to ensure those checks and balances.
Thank you. Councillor Strong.
Yeah, thanks for that. I understand your point that scrutiny is taking place, and a group that are probably more expert than us and able to drill down into it in more detail. Still tend to leave us in the dark as councillors, answerable to our residents. You know, I represent an area where a school has had some considerable difficulties in the recent past. I think they're being dealt with. I don't really know though, because I'm not actually getting the information that will be useful to me. So I would appeal as far as we can to provide the information that we need. But I do accept the point. But it's the checks and balances are there, and it's being dealt with. But from our angle, as people who need to answer to the public, that can give us difficulties if it's if the information isn't reasonably public.
Councillor Song, could I suggest that if you have a particular concern, or simply the concern that you don't know enough about any given school in your ward, that you pick that up directly with the team? It would seem less appropriate to have a broader discussion involving a lot of people when it's actually a matter concerning a particular ward, a particular school that you may have an interest in. So I'd suggest that if that would work. I'm very happy we have a broader discussion, but it would need to be, I think, very much a private discussion. If it is a broad issue that affects all our schools, because of course it's not only secondary, it's what's going on in primary, and we may have particular interest in that too. But would that be appropriate from your point of view? Moving on to Councillor Crook.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to draw your attention to 6.7, 6.8 and 6.9, if I may. The appointment of the YPA data officer has enabled improvements in the capture and the use of data around exclusions. And if we go to 6.8, there's a rise in instances of high risk. Would that be a collation between those two areas that, due to exclusion, therefore set in Welsh Government guidance? And if I come to 6.9, the move into a more suitable accommodation with pupils referral unit and bringing those pupils back into mainstream, probably a concern that I would have, and how are you going to manage that? Because most of these pupils would be referral one-to-one, when maybe we're having a reduction in school staff. And that bothers me. When you bring these people back into mainstream, what happens to the rest of those pupils in that area?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Crook. So there's kind of two parts to that. I wonder, Kiva, would you pick up the first one, which is around the data and the 6.7, 6.8? Thanks.
So 6.7 and 6.8, I would suggest, are discrete. They don't flow into each other. So 6.7 is around the system and the process that we had for recording exclusions. So we've made that more robust. We've made that more streamlined. Schools are very aware what their obligation is to record it. We've done a lot of work and training to make sure that all exclusions are recorded historically across Wales, across the UK. There's a terminology that's sometimes used called a soft exclusion, where a child is encouraged to go home to cool down. That is an unlawful exclusion. So we're making, and it has potential safeguarding risks. So from a safeguarding point of view and a legality point of view, we've worked really hard to make sure that that's not acceptable, and to make it easier to record, to clarification about recording. So that's 6.7, but also the data officer post enables us to scrutinise that, to number crunch that, to look at moves and trends on a monthly basis, so that we can say, look, actually we can see this school is going up or down, or this year group is going up or down. So that would be 6.7. In terms of 6.8, the threshold for exclusion is set by Welsh Government in that statutory guidance. It has to kind of go through 4 particular hoops, if you like. Hoop 1 is a serious behaviour breach. Hoop 2, it has to be and behaviour breach, serious behaviour breach, and that there is a health and safety or risk aspect that could prejudice learners in the school or staff in the school. And then you have to go through various other hoops in terms of making sure that you're not applying a tariff to that, your behaviour policy, and you're looking at the particular instances of that incident, and looking at if the child has any additional learning needs, looking at if they've got any particular vulnerability, if they have a social worker, etc. So there is a risk assessment inherent in that, to qualify for it being a last resort to merit an exclusion. That leads into how we would then access provision at the PRS to that threshold for support from the local authority. We've also done a lot of work with officers and with school leaders and with schools overall and the PRS around how we safely manage reintegration back into school by using learner behaviour risk assessment that is multi-agency. So if it relates to a child, for example, hypothetically, that a child has been excluded for a particular issue that merits at that point in time an exclusion, then we will do the work collectively through the PRU, but it might be through other agencies. It might be through referral to YOS prevention. It might be referral to the fire information intervention service, depending on whatever the issue was, to make sure that there is safety established over time, and that the risk has objectively as you can do it, reduced to a sufficient degree that the risk could then be managed in a phased returned intake back to mainstream school. So we have a process for that that's much better established now, and we have a paperwork trail for all of those things. And if schools don't feel reassured or content by that, we have an admission process through the Fair Access Panel where they can challenge that, and then we would look through that risk assessment document, which would have all the relevant contributions to it. Hope that answers.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Crook? Would you like?
How are we going to manage? How would we actually manage those pupils coming back into a secondary school because of a one-to-one tuition or whatever, really?
So that would be a part of a reintegration plan, which again is set through Welsh Government guidance for the exclusion and the inclusion guidance. We would sit down and we wouldn't even contemplate a return to mainstream until the PRS, or the people that had been providing the education, because as Morwenna said, we have to provide education. So we wouldn't even start at that conversation until we were satisfied that it looked a reasonable proposition and that we'd got that safety established. So this child has engaged with X number of sessions of this. This professional from YOS, for example, feels that the risk has gone from a red zone to an amber zone. And so the one-to-one support in a school is often not the defining criteria there. We'll look at the risk, what the nature of the risk is. Have we got a valid evidence basis for saying that enough work has been done to lower that risk? How is the child responding? Have they engaged with those sessions? And then we would have conversations with the school at that point saying, look, in our professional view, this is a reasonable time to try, but we will not send you in 9 till 3 full-time on the first day without any help. And the schools would certainly resist that, but we would have an ethical obligation to make sure that we were full and frank and fair in terms of the level of risk. We would sit down and would say, okay, for example, with this learner, actually, the risk is higher in this subject because they don't like this subject. They don't feel comfortable in it. So we'll understand that risk. We'll sort of RAG rate the subjects that they do. We'll reduce the risk in terms of the time they go in. We'll increase the support at that time. So there is a very comprehensive risk assessment and management process that will go on for usually 6 to 8 weeks. And that is a form of a reintegration plan and a form of a reduced timetable with good cause that's endorsed by Welsh Government. So, and it is very labour intensive. It's incredibly labour intensive, but it's necessary for the safety and well-being of everybody.
Thank you very much, and thanks for that really important question as well. And you know, the reintegration is one I'm sure that a lot of people wonder about, because you know the learner is still that young person whose life chances are so important. I'm going to take members of the committee first. So Councillor Powell, if you'll allow me, I'll take members of the committee and then come back to other members. Don't mean to be discourteous, but I hope you understand that is appropriate. So first of all, Councillor Howells.
Yeah, thank you, Morwenna, Kenneth, for bringing this report to us. My question is just really around the shortness of the data. So we've only got access to 2021, and I appreciate you've only been in post 2 years, so there may not have been any data available. Is it just simply that there wasn't any data prior to 21? It would be useful to see, you know, pre sort of COVID, how the figures were, whether you know the COVID created a dip, and then we're actually just building back up to a normal level, if that's normal is the right word to use there. And also, is there any sort of national comparable data available so that we can see how we are doing, you know, overall? Are we following a similar pattern? And then my other question was the correlation between exclusion and 7.6 not in education or training. Can we quantify the long-term costs of an exclusion so that it's clear for us to see any savings that could be that we're making by an early intervention? Or, you know, at this stage, so that it's clear to see, you know, the savings are there to be made.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Howells. I think in terms of trends of data, Kiva's your lady to answer that one. I'll hand over.
So in terms of Estin, when we scrutinised by them, we would look at 3-year trends often. And so we're now in a period where we could have a 3-year full data from when schools were fully back on board. So we could provide that potentially if that was wanted by scrutiny. In terms of Welsh Government data, it is provided, but it's a year and a bit in arrears. So we haven't got it yet for the period in question. And the terms of the report we were asked, my understanding was that it was for the last academic year. So yes, we do, in other forums and in our day-to-day business, look at the 3-year trends. In terms of, we also look at comparison with our consortia partners, but unfortunately we weren't able and didn't get consent to be able to share that for reasons that, of the other partners. So we would be waiting for that year in arrears or Wales data to be able to give you fuller than this now. But again, in terms of our role, we definitely look at the overall trajectory over the last 3 years for all education remit matters. And we would look at a school on that basis as well when we're looking and considering whether or not we need to put in extra support, extra challenge around things, if we need to go through a team around the school process, all those sorts of things. And we would also not just look at the exclusion data, and I think that was one of the points that one of your colleagues raised and the head teacher raised in the meeting we had last week, that to use real caution against looking at up or down in terms of data as being, inverted commas, good or bad, because we also have to look at a multiplicity of layers, because we don't want schools to be being perceived as good because they don't exclude, because the child might also be having an internal sanction and actually missing their lessons, but that's not recorded and not required to be recorded in the same way, but it is a restrictive practice. So we would look at all those factors and about the inclusion overall and the meaningful inclusion of being in their actual timetabled lessons when we're making those comparisons as well. So that would become a much, much longer report. I'm really happy to talk to that in any different way, but that's the level of challenge, that constructive criticism that we would give to schools around their data over those periods if there is a rise. Overall, there is definitely a rise that is manifest over the last 3 years in exclusions, to the extent that Welsh Government have reinstigated and created an All Wales group for people like me who work with exclusion for local authorities because of their concern around that across the board. And again, I don't want to use the COVID word again, but it is partly that post-COVID. In terms of the NEAT data, it's not data that we would have to hand, and it would be very difficult to try and ascertain that. And I can think about that. I need some time to think about that and see if we could try to provide that. What is clear is that, again, Eston have made a report last summer which talked about making sure that all local authorities think about their 14 to 19 offer and consider things like junior apprenticeships, thinking about pathways into work for that. And we have a colleague who's working on that, looking at the 3 to 19 school and looking at the opportunities for a construction work and apprenticeships within that. So we work closely with the post-16 and the pre-16 lead workers for NEAT prevention. So again, if I'm in an exclusion meeting, a reintegration meeting following exclusion, we would talk about what is that mixed offer. Is one of the reasons for exclusion that you haven't got a mixed offer? Have you thought about work experience? Have you thought about different provisions and different pathways? But that also feeds into some of the challenging situations we have in terms of resourcing. So, for example, Careers Wales have reduced the support that we have for work experience in Monmouthshire compared to some other LAs that haven't received that reduction. So we're trying really hard to adapt to quite a challenging environment, I think. Hope that answers.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Kiva.
And thank you, Kiva, for that. Just pushing a little bit back on this issue of pandemic, and of course what we're describing is the policies that were introduced on education during the peak of the pandemic rather than more generally COVID itself. But those policies, they were no longer applying to schools by the time we got to the school year 22-23. And in the period of 22-23 through to last year, the number of days lost through fixed-term exclusions more than doubled. So after the impact of the policies on education drawn in for emergency purposes during the pandemic, we've seen a more than doubling of the number of days lost. And it just, I think it just sits there as a question, do we really know what's happening there? Because, some people might say it's a lazy assumption to say it's all due to the pandemic. I'm not suggesting that anyone's lazy in this room. It's almost maybe an easy assumption is the better choice of words. But if this has more than doubled after those policies were no longer being applied, is there something else that's at play there? And I don't expect that you can answer that here, but I think it's something that we need to really just challenge ourselves about. But moving on, Councillor Pavia is next.
Thanks, Chair. Can you hear me? I know I was having microphone problems earlier on.
We can indeed. Sorry. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks for the report. I think it is interesting, as Dr. Wagstaff was saying, that there's a real different perspective now in terms of students and families towards education due to the pandemic, and many have realised that there are alternative forms of education which are possible, challenging the perceived narrative that attending school is the only viable option. So essentially the social contract has been broken. But I think there's two elements here. So there's the self-exclusion, which I think we touched upon in terms of the emotional-based school avoidance, issues around anxiety and mental health, which is sort of facilitated by the pupil and their family. But then you've got the exclusion, which is directed by the schools, which I think is the focus of this report by and large. I was looking at the Institute for Public Policy Research paper that was published in September for my work purposes, which was who was losing out in learning, and it is a strong case for reducing exclusions across mainstream. And the focus is on the education system in England, but there is significant correlation in relation to Wales as well. Schools cannot give the opportunities that their children deserve if they are missing lessons, and there are issues around lost potential, and I think that the data in that report is quite stark in terms of children with special education needs were 4 times more likely to be suspended than other pupils. Similarly, high percentages in terms of children in contact with social services, children growing up in poverty. So just in terms of our cohort of pupils that have been excluded, if we've got a strong profile of these pupils, a longitudinal profile over a period of time that looks at some of the issues that are potentially underpinning before pandemic, I know there's issues around the pandemic, but before pandemic, issues around adverse childhood experiences, issues around neurodevelopmental challenges. Potentially, these children may be on waiting lists for speech and language therapy. Have we got that strong profile for those pupils who have been excluded or have been received fixed and permanent exclusions? In terms of the pupil referral unit, I have got worries about the capacity there. Discussions about capacity in the paper. There is a significant deficit for the pupil referral unit. It's anticipated there's going to be 1.5 million projected at the year end. Is how viable is that additional capacity to support pupils, families, and obviously the schools where those pupils have left? My concern is that that capacity is probably not there, or is dwindling very, very quickly. And just in terms of the education other than in school offer, what is the offer of the authority? Are we looking at, is it full time? Is it part time? I'd be interested to understand that. And finally, Chair, if you indulge me in one more question, I was interested in the Estin report looking at the education other than in school, focusing on the issues around local authority quality assurance in relation to the EOTAS offer, that local authorities do not monitor these arrangements robustly enough. The agreements and length of placements vary. There's inconsistency. So do our quality assurance procedures stand up to the rigour that that Estin pulled out of in that report last year? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pavey. Marina, you've been doing well to work your way through them, but let's see how we do. And I'm sure Councillor Pavey will pick us up if we've neglected any.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for your questions, Councillor Pavia. If I pick off the first one, I hope I've got these right. So looking at the profile of our more vulnerable learners, so including children who have barriers to learning, additional learning needs, have contact with social care or are children looked after or care experienced, and those who are living in poverty, our data analysis at the moment is as Kiva's already alluded to, far more robust than it has been, and we absolutely analyse all of those groups. Unfortunately, what you talked about the paper, I think that is reflected nationally in that those children from those groups, and I think we did state it in the report, is too high, with a particular focus on children looked after and children with experience of social care. There is a real drive to not exclude those children, and we do everything possible to support, to mitigate the risks associated with those children, because obviously we're the corporate parent and it is our responsibility to ensure that they are, as far as it's possible, not excluded and missing education. In terms of additional learning needs, our preventative and our proactive approach within Monmouthshire is really kind of key to that. I hope you are all aware of our Autism in Schools and Settings project. That's a national first, and the whole basis of that is around ensuring our schools are enabling environments and make reasonable adjustments for children who are on the neurodevelopmental profile, so may have autism. But what we acknowledge within that project is those strategies, those approaches, that provision is appropriate for so many of our children with barriers to learning or additional learning needs. So actually, although we've done that with a particular focus on our autistic population, because that is our I think it was a third of our population of children with additional learning needs, those approaches and strategies are absolutely relevant for other children, and in particular recognising the behaviours of concern that can present because of some of those additional learning needs, and the needs then for our schools to mitigate against. We spend a lot of time, the education support team, the educational psychologists, the autism team, which spans a whole multi-agency team across the local authority, of getting into our schools and getting those messages in about the expectation that they make those reasonable adjustments. So absolutely we monitor, we do have a strong profile around those. It's still too high. We want them to be in school, and we're really proud to say I think all of our schools, bar maybe two, have engaged with that project already. We haven't had to push it, so I think there's a real thirst from our schools to get the support and the skills in place. If I pick off, I hope I've answered that one, Councillor Pavia. If I pick off the second question, which was to do with the People Referral Service, you are right. It is, the capacity has been of concern, and I haven't got the data to hand, but again, there has been a significant change in the population and the presentation, the demand for that service over the last 3 or so years. The population within our pupil referral units, which are the bases within the local authority who typically provide the education for children who've been permanently excluded, has doubled. They were set up for typically 6 to 8 pupils. We've now got circa 10 to 12 in both of those. And obviously last year, having those permanent exclusions put a huge amount of pressure on that service and that statutory obligation to meet those educational needs. Again, Monmouthshire are responding by helping us to look at providing more capacity, and we have just recently moved into a new pupil referral unit base in the north of the county, which will make a significant difference to the provision that we're able to provide. Ideally, we want to be providing an opportunity for children to come out before they're permanently excluded, to provide an intervention so that they can return to school, rather than at the point of permanent exclusion when they are out, and then we have to look at an alternative. Monmouthshire is challenged by its rurality and its geography in that we don't have multiple secondary schools in a town. So if a child is permanently excluded from one of our secondary schools and can be returned safely to school, as Kiva's discussed, we then have the issue of how we transport, and they're outside of their local communities. So for us, we really want to prevent those exclusions in the first place, and having a pupil referral service that can provide that preventative intervention at a point at which is appropriate is what we're aiming for. That's been really difficult recently because of the levels of permanent exclusion and because of the accommodation within which and the capacity of that service. We are working really hard. The pupil referral service sit as part of our inclusion team, and we work collectively with them to really try and enhance the offer, the rigour, the quality, the in and the out of that service as best we can. But yeah, you are right. The capacity, I think, is of concern to all of us, as is the budget that you've alluded to, and we're really trying to get a greater grasp and understanding on that. Part linked to that is your part 3 question, which was around EOTUS, education other than at school. The PRU, the pupil referral units, are a form of EOTUS, but it's not the only offer that we have within the local authority. We also have EOTUS, what we class as EOTUS medical provision, so that's typically for children who are either too unwell to attend school because of physical reasons, which was the original design of that model, typically children who may have broken a limb or requiring surgery or recovering from cancer. But in almost all cases now, the provision of EOTUS medical is for children with mental health and emotional well-being needs. They have to have a consultant level letter or a psychology level letter saying they are too ill to attend school. And then again, we as a local authority are obliged to provide that education. Obviously, those children are too ill to attend school, so we do not expect them to attend on a full-time basis. Again, we've seen a massive growth in that area. We went from, I think, about 16 children pre-pandemic. We are now around 40 and 50 children. We probably receive 3 new requests for EOTUS medical every 3 weeks at inclusion panel that go through. We have other requests that we push back on, which sounds awful, but that's the reality. So that service is hugely under pressure, and we are looking at, we have already this year set up new models about how to meet that need. So there's a mix of online learning in groups, one-to-one tuition at home, but also now small group learning within non-school based environments within the local authority to provide opportunities for small groups of children to come back into social groups and experience some learning, in the hope that we can bridge that slowly back into our schools. That is difficult in the current climate of not having enough support staff in our schools to receive those children who need something very bespoke to build their confidence. So again, to answer your question about the EOTUS offer, it's broad and complex, very person-centred, and the requirements around the hours, the offer that is made will depend very much on the child's presentation, their needs at that time. But that is under, constant review. It's expected that there's a regular review with child and family and officers and everybody involved. The aim is always to try to get that child back into school, but for some children that takes a long period of time. For others, we're getting better at trying to turn that around quicker, but it is a gentle process required around that. In terms of, I hope your final question, if I've got it correct, was around the Estin paper on EOTUS, education other than at school, and the quality assurance process. So we had some additional capacity into the inclusion service last year, and we have a seconded post that we're utilising grant for at the moment, which is additional learning provision and partnership needs. So we have a commissioning officer as well within the inclusion service. So collectively, we have developed a much more robust process around the quality assurance of the EOTUS provision. We've tightened up the mechanisms and the processes around our inclusion panel, which happens every 3 weeks, which is where any requests for EOTUS other than at school, including pupil referral service, education other than at school, EOTUS, including our access to the pupil referral service, are accepted and then monitored and tracked. In terms of the quality assurance, that is just an ongoing piece of work. That is a requirement of the ELNA Act, that we ensure we have sufficient provision in place. And there is a piece of work we're undertaking at the moment to really explore that, to look at the presentation of need, which actually does relate in somewhat to behaviours of concern or challenge, and the relatedness with the social, emotional, mental health profile under the ELNA Act, and ensuring that we as a local authority have sufficient provision for those children to meet those needs. So we're on it. There's always more work to be done. But the quality assurance, the sort of robust cycle around that, I'm fairly confident we're at a point where that, that's in development, and we're, developing that all the time in terms of ensuring the impact of what we're offering to these children and young people who might find themselves out of school for whatever reason. I hope I've answered all your questions, Councillor Pavia.
Thanks, Dr. Wagstaff. They're really comprehensive. I think, in terms of our concern, all of us here are worried about children falling through the gaps. And, you've only got to look at the Welsh Youth Justice data. 53% of those receiving custodial sentences persistently absent from school. 73% have received a fixed term exclusion. Nearly 80% of those receiving custodial sentences have been identified with a special educational need or additional learning need. So it's obviously really positive that we are profiling that. It seems it's a strong process in place, but I think it goes back to what the chair said. It's really important that our committee just keeps on top of this and really focuses everyone's attention to this. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pavia, for raising those issues. They're really really important ones, and the response is very helpful. I'm going to move on to Councillor Powell now for the question. And thank you for bearing with me.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, in a way, a little bit of it's been answered in this last question. How much capacity is within the schools for children that are excluded from the classroom but are still kept within the school, being taught within the school, rather than being excluded and going home? Because very often those children, their parents are either working or they're not there to look after them, and they're not there to oversee their working at home. So in a way, they're not progressing. And I wondered how much capacity you've got. I mean, I'm thinking back to years and years and years ago in my day, when if you were in trouble, you were out in the corridor working on your own. And if the head came by and saw you, look out. But then you didn't actually get excluded from school unless you were really expelled, which was really bad. And I wonder how much capacity you've got within the schools for that sort of teaching, out of the class, but not actually excluded from the school.
So I'll pick up some of that and then I'll pass over to Kiva. So in terms of how our schools manage their kind of in-house provision, it's different within our schools, but we would expect that there are interventions, or in some cases some provisions, small groups, things like that, depending on the needs of the children. We've got all of our schools, I think all at the moment, have access to our emotional literacy support assistants as an example, but there would be a expectation within a school that, in line with sort of the ALNET, so the Additional Learning Needs Education Tribunal Act, that they have provision that is considered universal, so all children can access. So that might be around, expectations, management, behaviour, things like that within classrooms. But then we work up through that. So then there's targeted support, which we would expect all of our schools to have in place for children who are presenting with some of these behaviours. And that might be about trying to understand the behaviour and get to the bottom of why it's being presented, and then provide the appropriate intervention. So if it's to do with, a frustration because they can't access a lesson because they might have some learning difficulties, that they would focus on that. But if it's to do with their kind of emotional regulation, their ability to express themselves, they may focus on that. Somebody earlier spoke about speech and language needs. That, that's something we're seeing increased instance of, and making sure that we address that. 3 of our secondary schools have access to in-house, in-reach support. So that's so they have kind of an in-house provision for children who are presenting with behaviours of challenge and concern, and how they manage, and that's the aim of that, is to prevent children falling out of school or coming out of school. I'll hand over to Kiva. I'm sure you've got something more to add there.
Yeah. So almost it's a branching key. There's 2 different routes that might look very similar. So what Morwenna has been alluding to is almost the positive approach of making a reasonable adjustment to a child that has an additional learning need that might be, for example, ADHD and needing a movement break, or it might be a social and emotional mental health need. Because again, in terms of the data about ALN pupils being excluded, almost by definition, because of the way that ALNet's written, if you've had lots of exclusions, you will potentially fall within an ALN definition because of challenging behaviour. So that might itself be the ALN need. So if we've identified that a child needs extra support, we would expect the school to meet that, and that might be out of class, it might be in a small group, it might be in a nurture class, it might be in a small provision where the lessons are taught in that way, and we would really endorse that as a positive, reasonable adjustment of meeting an ALN need. If you are, the other side of the branching key is if you are sent out of your class and you're denied the opportunity to access your normal taught timetable, then that is a restrictive practice that is often called something like going to internal reflection. It's a form of segregation, which is less bad, for want of a better word, than a formal exclusion, because the child is in school and they are safe. And it would be part of a legitimate graduated response for a school to apply as a sanction, and we wouldn't really use the word punitive or punishment, but we can still use the word sanction. So we could use that as part of a behaviour policy sanction to send the child somewhere else. In those situations, the child is often not taught. They might have a cover teacher there supervising them, but they're not given lessons, which is why we as a local authority and Welsh Government as a nation are concerned about the use of those internal segregations, and which is why Wales, unlike England, have signed up to reducing all restrictive practices and to advocate for more scrutiny of those internal segregations where a child is missing their actual taught lessons. So it is an issue. It's an issue we're aware of. It's an issue Welsh Government are aware of. And when we have, and that's one of the reasons why I said when you're looking at the data for a school that don't formally exclude, do they have a workaround that also involves the child not getting what they're entitled to in terms of education? So it is complicated and it's challenging in terms of the availability of staff. And that feeds into the work we're doing around reduced timetables, around pastoral support plans, that also ties into Councillor Pavlier's question about making sure it's a full-time, meaningful offer that's appropriate.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'll take Councillor McConnell's last question as the last question, and then we will take a 5-minute break, just so everyone's aware. But Councillor McConnell, thank you.
Chair. Most of what I was going to ask has just in the last couple of responses been covered. I just want to comment really, there's a growing picture of really a sort of lot of risky, disruptive behaviour and a lot of distress and vulnerability. And whatever that is due to. And that I think academics and researchers will be, and Dr. Wagstaff possibly will be writing and reflecting on this. I mean, the pandemic was a quarter of the life of some of the people we're talking about, you know, at my great age. It flew by, but there we go. I just think we are absolutely rightly completely centred on the welfare and education of those children who are most vulnerable. But I think as a council we should also acknowledge the experience of staff and the position that puts them in and the hard work that they're doing. And I suspect some experience of vicarious trauma on their part. So I just think as a council we should acknowledge that and maybe seek some reassurances as to their welfare as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McConnell. Yes, perhaps a comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we have a real focus on well-being of staff across the authority, and actually that was heightened in the pandemic because of the impact of that on all of us, including our staff in schools and settings. There are a number of projects going on at the moment around which are particularly focused on the well-being of staff. There's a supervision pilot going on and a number of pieces of work. that is a real worry to us, because, as you say, we don't expect anybody to go to work and experience situations that can face them, and some of these instances do include adults, staff being kind of, verbally or physically hurt. So absolutely, that is a focus, and I know the work that Kiva does relentlessly with schools where there are issues that have come up to light that put children at risk of exclusion. A real focus of that is on the health and well-being of the staff as well, and that forms part of the considerations when we think about the risk assessments and the reintegration of how that is going to fit. And it is, Kiva talks a lot about a balance when having those discussions, because it is a real balance. We have to think about those staff as well as that child. At our heart is obviously the child and the young person, but their behaviour at times does have an impact that's far greater than that. Have you got anything to add to that, Kiva?
Yeah, I mean, we have referred to that in the report. It's absolutely right. And as Morwenna has said, one of the criteria, when I talked about the hoops that you have to go to lawfully exclude, number 2 is that risk, and that risk relates to not just pupils but to staff. If there is an incident, again, we've done a lot of work over the last 18 months or so around making sure that we all understand our health and safety at work obligations, whether that's as officers for lone working, whether that's for staff in schools, and making sure that we understand that that has an interface with recruitment, retention, sickness, absence, all of those things. There's a multiplicity of issues around that. Personally, I've been that teacher in the class when I was, had disruptive children in the class, challenging behaviours, and was pregnant. I have a great deal of sympathy understanding how that feels, and I think we have to make sure that we reflect that through the processes, through health and safety, and that's one of the reasons we talked about in the seminar around why you can't just ban exclusion. It's not just for the safety of staff, it's for pupils, but also for staff, and it does relate to the complexity of that whole COVID thing, because, for example, if you've got a 15-year-old now, during COVID, they were 9 to 11. If you've got a 16-year-old now, during COVID, they were 10 to 12. So at the time that they moved from primary to secondary school, they had not only no school physical attendance and no regulation and no having to sort of conform to uniform. That was a whole 2-year period, which, as you say, is a really significant part of their life. But it was even more significant than that, because I can remember I spent a lot of my professional life talking about the risks around online gaming and Xboxes. Actually, it seems a dim memory now, but Welsh Government were endorsing at that point in time that you do your education using an Xbox, because we didn't have enough laptops across Wales. So that's how disconnected what we did in those 2 years was, and those patterns were built up. And again, there's analogies to what it's like for us as adults, from flexible working to remote working to hybrid working. Those things take time for us as adults to adjust to, and we're still doing that, and society moves on. So again, it alludes back to the chair's sort of comment as well, that yes, it's really complex and nuanced, but those young people are still in school now, and my personal view is that, based on the data and based on the feedback that comes through when there is persistent disruptive behaviour, that is a key part of all of that. And we review when there's been an accident, incident or violence at work, and we support with the paperwork for that. We look at the risk and the reintegration meetings for that around all of those factors. But for me, that's why it will be phasing through over those years, and it's not a quick fix. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, also, Kiva. And just to extend that point from Councillor McConnell, I'm sure committee members, you'd support me in thanking the staff in all our schools and teachers in all our schools, because the skill sets involved nowadays in teaching and in running schools, managing schools, and dealing with the issues that arise on a daily basis, I think they are in a different league nowadays to when many of us would have been at school, and the skill sets involved are much broader, down to individual teachers having written notes on multiple pupils who will be in their classes in terms of the different issues that they need to be cognizant of and sensitive to and work with. So it's a very challenging environment that they work in, and it's important that we not only think about their welfare but thank them for the incredible work that they do, but also the heads and the management of our schools who have to take the most difficult decisions around exclusions. And before just moving the report, again, if colleagues would allow me, it's just to get the message out there to all parents and guardians that the very best place that your child can possibly be Monday to Friday in school time is in school. And as Councillor Pavey has itemised, the correlation between really complex problems in a person's life and those young people who don't attend school is very high. And if nothing else, do pay attention to that. Make sure your child is in school and keep it that way, because their future is in your hands. So I hope you don't mind me trying to get that message out there. But thank you for everyone. I'm going to move the report and the recommendations that are set out, and thank everyone for their questions and for their very full responses. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Kiva. Thank you, Rowena. Thank you, Councillor Grocott. And we'll take a 5-minute break at that point and come back to planning annual performance reports. So we'll aim to restart. We'll be aiming for 10:02. Thank you very much. Okay, and thank you for rejoining us now on the planning annual performance report. As we move into this and welcoming officers to the chamber, and I know they'll be introducing themselves at the first point they speak. It's good to see you here. We're looking at this as a performance report on planning. It's as it says, it's the report we see every year. And an update on that. This is not to look at individual planning applications. It's not about looking at even the much larger RLDP, which has been looked at and is currently being consulted on. This is about how the planning function is performing, and that's what we're going to be focused on if everybody could ensure that we do that. It's also just to pick out that we're a scrutiny committee, and that's not to say that we are here to criticise in everything that we do. We're here to scrutinise, and part of that is to recognise where there is good performance, and there are good examples of good performance in the report in front of us. And I just want to say and feed back on behalf of the committee to colleagues. I'd be grateful if you could pass this back, Craig, to the team, that we really recognise it and we really appreciate it where it's there. There's a lot of hard work goes into an awful lot of the work that is done here, and so where it's good, it's recognised and we appreciate it. So if you'd be good enough to make sure that colleagues that we don't always see in the committee would know that, that would be helpful. So we're going to go straight across then to Craig. I think you're going to kick us off, or it's going to be Phil. Okay, you're pointing at each other. That's a good way to start. I'll let you decide. And if you could run through your initial slides, we'll then open it for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Philip Thomas. I know most of you here. I'm Development Services Manager, so I have overall management of the development management function, which includes the applications team, heritage, planning enforcement, and our support team. So if I just share my screen very briefly, and I'll be as brief with this as I can without making it too much of a... all right, there we are, front strike. Oh, something there.
You had it there.
There we
it's
are.
Back again.
There we are.
Good.
Great, thank you. So this is looking at the annual performance report of the planning service, or APR, as it's talking about abbreviations and acronyms, won't we? Annual performance report of the planning service, and we look back at the previous complete year, 2023-2024. So the annual performance report is divided into standardised sections with the format and appearance consistent throughout all of Wales, and we're all reporting on the same performance indicators. If you've read the report, there's a performance framework which is traffic lit, which is probably the bit that stands out really, and it's what we're ranked really on in terms of the performance indicators. So it looks at local priorities, local pressures, corporate priorities, customer feedback, and overall performance, and how well the actual team is resourced. Performance is always analysed over those 5 areas there. Plan making, we haven't included that because it's adequately covered in the annual monitoring report for the local development plan, so it'd be duplication really in terms of including it here. Efficiency, which we'll come to in the performance framework, quality of service, engagement with the public, and enforcement. So in previous years, we've always had national figures provided by the Welsh data unit, I think they're called, but we haven't had those since we were talking about the limitations following COVID and effects of COVID. This is not really anything to do with us as a local authority. It's to do with the fact that the Welsh Government haven't provided the data to us. So we're not comparing apples with apples. We're comparing data back to the pre-COVID levels of 2018, 2019. Those are the last national figures we've got to compare, but we have compared it there, even though it's probably not fair given it's pre-COVID and some local authorities aren't as well resourced as they were pre-COVID, it's fair to say. How did we actually do over last year? So we feel we can be pleased with the performance. Proportion of all applications determined within 8 weeks or the agreed timescale improved by 4%, rising to 93%. The target is 80% from Welsh Government. The average time to determine all applications reduced to 100 days from 110 days in the previous year. Part of the reason for that is we worked through new solutions to solve the phosphate pollution problems that had contributed to delays for many applications in the sort of Monmouth, Abergavenny, Usk area and within the open countryside as well. The south is excluded from that because it's, it doesn't affect any of the rivers, Usk or Wye, which are, what's the term? They're actually in the, where the sea comes in. I've forgotten the term. Tidal. Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Couldn't remember. Proportion of major applications determined within agreed times of 67%, but it only included 3 applications, which is kind of an indication of where we are with the life cycle of the local development plan. It's coming towards its end, and we hence the need for a replacement plan. 84% of listed building applications determined within approved timescales, so that was an improvement on the previous period by 9%, and we provided a valued heritage service for Blaenau Gwent Council. And then next slide is a continuation of previous. The percentage of applications that were approved was 97%, and that doesn't mean to say that we just approve everything willy-nilly. It's an indication that when we do negotiate to get the best scheme possible before we then can approve it. And then we weed out a lot of the perhaps the less acceptable schemes via the pre-application advice service, so that people are given advice up front that it's not really worth them actually applying for that, or they need to dramatically change the application so that when it is submitted it's more likely to be approved. So that's a sort of fair indication of that work in that area. And this is one we would like to actually highlight. Particularly enforcement performance has improved over previous years, where it's fair to say that the measure wasn't as doing as well as we'd liked it to have done. So in the performance framework, you'll see that the 2 enforcement measures are now green for good, in that the percentage of cases investigated in 84 days rose to 83% from 65% the previous year. And the performance improved in terms of the average time to take positive action, which is the overall period, and it fell from 123 days to 91 days. So it's also rated good. We investigated 286 enforcement cases and served 13 notices. And we get the notices served via consultation with the delegation panel, as Councillor Murphy and Councillor Webb will be aware. Significant 106 monies, Section 106 monies, approximately 1.2 million received towards important community infrastructure schemes, including the Velo Park proposal, which is yet to be built, but has been granted planning permission in Llanfoist, and those stem from major developments such as at Derry Farm and Grove Farms, Llanfoist. That's a slide just to give an indication of it's a toolkit that the Royal Town Planning Institute put together with Welsh Government to actually promote the value of planning via land use allocations in the local development plan, via planning permissions granted, via Section 106 agreements that have been put together, and community development secured, contributions secured, and indeed includes the effect of protecting the environment through serving enforcement or taking enforcement action. So you can see that the value of planning, should say 2022, 23 down there at the bottom, 23, 24, sorry, is almost 69 million pounds, 68.6 million pounds. So it gives an idea of the value that planning can contribute to the local economy and local communities.
Well, I think it's fair to say that you'd need a microscope to read that here, but it's in the main report.
It's in the main report,
for any resident who's looking at that and searching for some kind of reading device. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, apologies for that. What I would say to that toolkit is the land values behind it haven't been updated for about 6 or 7 years, and that's something that we would be interested in investigating with the Royal Town Planning Institute, because you can't change the land values that sit behind that toolkit. So obviously land value will have gone up since then, quite a bit significantly. So it's probably underplaying the value that the planning system contributes to the local economy. And then this is that framework. Yeah, sorry, again, it's a little bit small there for the public to see, but hopefully the right-hand column shows the latest year we're looking at, with the different categories, and of them there are 10 green categories, because it runs down to the next slide as well, and 2 are fair, which is amber, and we have no red poor measures there. So I won't go through all of those, but you can see those at your leisure. That's the rest of it. In terms of key activity, a lot of that is what you'd expect as carrying out the replacement of the LDP, providing pre-application advice, handling almost 1,000 applications, of which 97, as I've said, were approved, securing those important financial contributions from the grant of planning permission, and safeguarding the county's 2,400 listed buildings and 31 conservation areas, and taking robust enforcement action against unauthorised development that is unacceptable in the public interest, and then working with other agencies to provide sustainable development, and resolving things like the nutrient pollution problems in the River Wye and Usk, so that new development doesn't compromise the river quality there. And then we've identified 4 actions going forward for the current year that we're in. Action 1 includes is broken down into 2. It's to do with digitisation of information, so that improves access for users of the system, so that older planning applications which are on microfiche will be scanned, and so people can actually research much older planning applications online, so they don't need to travel to County Hall and make an appointment. And then digitise tree data that we have regarding very old, some of our older tree preservation orders, so the information is accurate and available online. The public can again research their inquiries, and it will also help our tree officer in carrying out their TPO work, tree preservation order work. Action 2 is to finalise and seek political approval for the Buildings at Risk strategy, which will help address some of our more dilapidated listed building assets, and to realise sustainable future use for those buildings. We've had that we've actually finalised that and got political approval for that BAR, as Amy will confirm. Action 3 is to continue to invest in our staff. It's a very if you like, competitive labour market out there at the moment. So there is a small pool of planners, so you need and heritage officers and other specialist officers. So we do need to try and hang on to the staff that we can by training them, rewarding them as much as we can within the budget constraints we've got. But training can be in-house, it can be done with more perhaps ingenuity than just throwing money at it. So we're continuing to try and invest in our staff to make sure that they stick with us, if you like, and help us achieve the results we want to. And then the final action is to improve communication and relationships with our community and town councillors, and provide some updated planning training for them with an emphasis on enforcement matters. And those are some slides just to show some developments that have been built recently. Devorden, Mardy, top right, And then you've got the Maybe Bridge development, which is actually fairly nearing completion now, in the bottom 2 slides. And then that's the excellent care accommodation that's been provided at the Crick Road development, which has opened relatively recently. Was visited actually by the Royal Town Planning Institute president last month, who was very impressed with the overall development. And yeah, so that's the end of the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Phil. It's very useful, and it's just to say to any residents watching that information is in the report, and so are those pictures of the developments as well. I was also glad when you asked the question, where does the sea come in? I was about to say a leak. So I was very pleased when Councillor Murphy responded by title. But I'm going to open it to questions, and Councillor Murphy, first of all.
Yeah, just picking up on the digitising all of the microfiches and the tree records and everything. Got a time scale for that, Phil?
It's quite complicated. A lot of it's down to cost and budget, and as you know, things aren't great at the moment. So it may take a few years. We'll be honest with you. This could be an action that's on next year's APR as well. There is some work we're doing with migration of the land registry data, our own. Land charges data, the data that we hold for land charge searches, that's going to be migrated over to the land registry, and there may be a budget there where we can get them as part of that process to pay for the digitisation of the older planning applications. I don't think that the tree work is covered by that, but if that's the case, then hopefully we can do it perhaps sooner rather than later. But it depends very much on budgets. So it's an aspiration, but something we need to do because. You know, while all the recent, you know, back to 2006, I think all the information is online. Anything before then, we need to work through. Yeah, so we haven't got a definite timeline, I'm afraid.
I was well aware of that, but the reason for bringing it up was I didn't want everybody to run away with the idea from the slide that it was going to be completed within 12 months. No. It's not.
It's a big job, yeah, that's for sure. Not just for us, but for all authorities. Thank you, Councillor Murphy, and Councillor Crook.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. 2 observations, if I may. The pre-application advice service, you say has followed our advice and 100% were approved, but you don't have any figures on that, percentages or even numbers. It would just be interesting to find out where we are with that, and I see that as being as a revenue earner going forward, but I can't see any particular figures that we have in the area of pre-application advice service.
So during this reporting, we closed.
Put your mic on, Phil.
Oh, sorry. So, Councillor Crook, during this period, 23-24, we closed 263 applications seeking pre-application advice, and 282 submissions for pre-application we closed. So we closed existing ones that we'd already had then, and 282 submissions for pre-application advice were received over that period as well. And of those that had pre-application advice, 35 led to planning applications, and 34 of those were approved and 1 was withdrawn, which is why we say we've got a 100% success rate. We have got data for the actual fees we've received for those. From memory, it's around 55,000 for our own bespoke service. If I'm honest, the statutory service that Welsh Government is like a minimum service. You don't even go to site. It's a desktop exercise. You're basically saying this policy applies, and this is our general view of it. You know, we think you should make a planning application, and it's likely to be successful if you do X, Y, and Z. But there's a lack of quality imbued in that through a site visit. Potential engagement with consultees like highways could be involved if you pay for the bespoke service, ecology, active travel potentially, whoever needs to be involved. So you add value to that process. and it's front-loading it then, so that when they come in, highways aren't cold. They've actually had an input at pre-application stage and advised what needs to be built into the planning application when it's submitted. Does that help?
Yeah, fine. And can I ask whether Monmouthshire are a leader in this this service, or are we sort of in the same table as anybody else in the area?
Hi, just for members of public at home, Craig O'Connor, Chief Officer for Police. Thanks, Councillor Cook, for the question. Ultimately, every planning authority's got different pre-application advice service, so they all do it slightly different. So it's very difficult to do a bit of a peer-peer learning depending on what services they offer. So some local planning authorities have decided just to go with the statutory service due to resources and due to the complications and constraints of their particular council, so they only offer a desktop assessment, a pre-app. Others have got similar services to us. Others charge more than us. So it's getting that right balance, I think, ultimately. We are in a bit of a state of flux at the moment in terms of the planning industry across Wales. And whilst government out at the moment on a consultation on how to charge for planning applications, the fee structure, which also have an implication on pre-application advice as well. It's all about making the planning service more resilient in terms of resources and making it more cost recovery. At the moment, planning services are costing councils at the minute across Wales, so it's looking at making it full cost recovery ultimately in terms of how we deliver our services. So that consultation's out at the moment. It's running until the 17th of January, so I'd ask people to engage in that and the members to look at that. It's quite an interesting document and consultation that's happening, but that's going to have an impact in terms of how we deliver our planning services going forward and also how we look at performance as well. So in that consultation, whilst governments are looking for engagement in terms of how we measure planning services across Wales, so it ties into all of this at the minute. So we are in a bit of a transition period within planning across Wales. So in answer to your question, planning pre-application advice services are delivered differently across Wales at the moment. I think we'll see a move towards them being a bit more consistent in terms of the approach, and then services being able to look at in terms of cost recovery as well. So watch this space, I think, is where I am with that. But in terms of our own service, I would, when we designed it, which was about 6-7 years ago now, it was all based on the customer, what the customer wanted, and customers fed back to us they want the on-site meeting, they want to be there in their house speaking to a planning officer directly, they don't want to be speaking to someone desktop. So that's the service we offer. There is a cost to that, but unfortunately we have to pass it on to the customer. But what it does mean, and what Phil was picking up on, is that when the application does land with us, we can be a bit more supportive and take them through in a sort of a handhold approach. That's what we like to suggest with the customers, because some people only engage in planning service once in their lifetime, so we want to be able to support them through that.
Yeah, the only reason why I asked that was because I understand we are quite unique in offering site visits, are we not? And I think that's a credit to the planning department, really. I very much appreciate those visits, and it gives you very much a local knowledge. So that's a credit to you, really. The last thing I may ask is the enforcement. Enforcement, you obviously have said about 286 cases, and there are only just 13 notices served. My calculation to that figure was just a mere 4.5%. I just wanted to get a better handle on it, really, as to where we are with enforcements, because there are a lot of people out there complaining to us local councillors that this is taking a long time, that's taking a long time, what's happening, what's going on, you know. So, but really, 4.5% I thought was quite a low figure from 286 enforcement cases.
Yeah, I take the point. I wouldn't get hung up on the fact that's a low figure. You'd only take enforcement action if there was a serious breach of planning control in the public interest. A lot of breaches can be actually negotiated via either a retrospective planning application, and you may apply conditions to that which can resolve some of the harm to, say, neighbour amenity. You can the actual transgressor, if I can put them like that, will actually hold his hand up and say, I didn't realise what I was doing was a problem, and will actually resolve it be it through a retrospective application or by ceasing the use or doing whatever they need to do, to resolve the breach. So, and then sometimes we investigate cases and there's no breach, or it wouldn't be expedient to take action. And I think that Councillor Murphy and Councillor Webb, when they're at the panel, they see cases we bring where there's been a minor breach. Technically, it's a breach of planning control. It could be that somebody's put some signage up, but there's actually nothing intrinsically. You wouldn't take action against the sign, for instance, or somebody's built, say, a garage and it's slightly larger than it should be. Say it should have been 6 metres and they built it 6.5. And then you've got to take the balance view. They're reluctant to apply again. You take the balance view that, that's not a serious breach, so it wouldn't be expedient. So that's probably why there are a multitude of cases really where you wouldn't serve a notice. You'd only serve a notice where it's a serious breach. Andrew's at the back. I don't know if you're there. Andrew Jones is our enforcement manager, and he's at the back. So I don't know whether he wanted to add to that, because he's deeply involved in all of these sort of issues. So he probably got an even better insight.
Andrew, welcome, and your comments on this, please.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you, Joe. And just by way of introduction, I'm Andrew Jones, one of the Development Management Area Managers that specifically covers the planning enforcement team. I agree with some of the points that Phil has made there. It's also worth noting that breaches of planning control can also be resolved through informal negotiation between officers and landowners and the interested parties, and that the breaches can be removed, be they an authorised use of land or a building, or be it operational development, that physical works can be removed through negotiation between officers and the interested parties without the requirement for a notice. We had member training last year on planning enforcement, and it's certainly something. We've got quite a few cases even just from the last 6 months where informal negotiation has sought breaches to be remedied and removed that were harmful, that there was identified planning harm, and they've been removed without the need for a notice, and that's testament to the work and the communication of the officers on the ground, trying to resolve those in the most appropriate way forward. And as has been discussed, sometimes for those serious breaches where there is an acceptable planning harm, we do take notice, serve notice, but even where there is cases where there is a breach of planning control, just to confirm, those do go through the delegated panel process in the same way that we seek authority to take action when we are coming to a view as officers and a recommendation that it's not expedient. That is also done through the panel process as well. That's not an officer sort of unilateral decision to do that. And there's obviously members here on the call today that are part of that panel. And I think I would say that one of the things that they may have noticed is the emphasis on us carrying out our investigations in a more timely and efficient manner and bringing more cases to them to consider the expediency at an earlier stage. So, if there's any other sort of specific on-the-ground issues I can pick up, but I think hopefully that explains, yes, the figure quoted by Councillor Crook appears at face value to be a low proportion, but I think we need to remind ourselves of the reason why and when we take planning enforcement action. It's not against any breached planning control. It's where it can't be resolved through other means, either a planning application or informal resolution, and there is identified public harm, and in those cases we do take the appropriate action. So thank you.
Andrew, thank you for that. I think it's worth, and thank you Councillor Crook for raising this, it's worth really emphasising your action 4, which is about, and your action list of 4 points, which is about improving the relationship and the communications with community councils and town councils. Because and I think this is one of the points that Councillor Crook was raising, that there is a really big gap in my experience between what residents, community councils, town councils expect enforcement to mean and what they see is happening. And if you said 4.5% to them, they would most certainly say that's a very low number. So the explanation becomes very, very important. It can calm down an awful lot of what can become quite heated discussion, and it can help to explain to people just the process and how it goes on. So I'd certainly support the action number 4. Councillor Murphy, I know you were just raising your hand. Was there a particular point you wanted to make?
Yeah, just to say there's some further checks and balance there, in that when we get to when it gets to the delegated panel. Not quite often, but there are occasions when officers will recommend that it is expedient to take enforcement action, and we decide it's not. So it doesn't always follow that the officer's view prevails. We do look at it and decide whether it's right or not.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. We'll move on to Councillor McConnell, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to add what a good service the pre-application advice service is, and I've had that feedback from applicants. Regardless of the revenue it's earning, it is a really appreciated and high-quality service. I wanted to ask 2 things. So question 1, the member... on the score chart, as it were, the member made decisions against officers' recommendation. That was put in as it was 2 out of 32 or 35, depending on the year, and that was 6%, which put us in the okay, I think, range. The fair range. The target was less than five, so that's not expressed as a percentage. So clarity on that would be interesting. But in particular, I wondered what good would look like locally, in that it seems appropriate that there would be no point of a planning committee if it was 100%. That's why we're here, really. So that figure of 2 out of 35 sits quite comfortably with me. I'm on the planning committee, so I'm aware of which those cases are, and they still sit very comfortably with me. So I'd appreciate the comments on that. The other was about, we just talked about the improving communication with community and town councillors around enforcement. And on a wider level, I think the public understanding of how planning works is more than vague. It is complex, but it's also, I'm aware of it. We are working towards very strict criteria and basically the law and preset policies when we determine a planning application. But I'm not sure that that's understood by people watching or considering planning applications. And I'm not sure, communications, comms in that respect is difficult, but I'm wondering whether there are any ways in which we could enhance that. Something as simple as a statement that's made at the beginning of every planning meeting saying, these are the principles under which planning applications are considered, or something. So those are 2 questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McConnell. Good questions. And Craig.
Thank you, Councillor McConnell, for your questions. Really appreciate them. In terms of the way that the framework is set out, just so every member's aware, really, that framework is from Welsh Government, so it's not something that we do in Monmouthshire County Council. So those are all percentage figures, so it's less than 5%, which would be considered to be a good, and then 5 to 9 is the fair, over 9%, and Welsh Government considered to be a negative. I guess the viewpoint on that is that planning officers and planning committee members should be aligned in terms of that collaborative working, applying the same planning policies. There shouldn't be that much of a discrepancy. However, and as I know and as yourself knows, Councillor McConnell, in terms of being on planning committee, there are some decisions which it's in the public interest to approve a scheme. The planning policies don't always firmly align. It's not a rigid approach, and that's not the way the planning is. Planning is very grey, and we work within the grey. We've got a planning policy framework, and then decisions need to be made on a balanced judgment. That's why the democratic planning committee is there for, is to make those balanced decisions, and that's the right thing to do. I've got no problem with us being within that fair range, and it all depends on the types of applications you have in that year. It might be that there are some applications in that year that the planning committee just feel that there is in the best interest that that goes ahead. That might be for economic drivers, that might be for housing reasons. There's a whole category of reasons why some developments are considered to be acceptable. So no problem at all with living in that space, in that fair space. The planning committee have got a really, really difficult job on some particular planning applications, and you know, we work together. I know as a member of the planning committee, I hope you feel like that as well in terms of planning officers and planning committee members working together on those decisions. And again, those figures are really representative of that. I think it's really key there as well to bring in the appeals decisions as well. The figure of 80% within that good range. A lot of the stuff that we do refuse, the planning inspector agrees with. 80% of it they agree with. So you know, that's really, really strong in terms of the advice the planning officers are giving their members as well. So hopefully that is giving you that reassurance in terms of that planning committee. So I've got no concerns over in terms of where we are in that position. In terms of the reference to planning enforcement, I think we are talking about that a lot today. It's the area of the planning service which gets the most sort of scrutiny, I would suggest, in terms of the members of the public, community councils. It's an area we've acknowledged as we need to improve on in terms of the way we communicate and we can educate town and community councils, and that is why it's one of our actions. So I think we acknowledge as a planning service we need to do better in this area. We want to do better. It's a very complicated area. It's a very legal area. When we do prosecute on those small number of cases, it takes a long time to get into the court. So there's a lot of work we need to do about making it a bit more transparent. So we do acknowledge action in this APR. We are going to take that forward, and more than happy to work with members over the next year in terms of how we can do that and how we can get the message out more and explain the process. But I'm not going to lie, it's a hard, difficult process, and it is frustrating for officers as well to work their way through it, particularly when there are issues which we need to address. But I want to give members the sort of reassurance as well when there is a particular issue which has particular public safety issue or public amenity issue, we do take instant action. There's been an example of that in the last couple of weeks where there was an unsafe highway access and we were there straight away issuing a notice. So when there is something significant which is in the public interest, we will take action swiftly.
And the point about how planning works and how we could better communicate or...
There is... on the agenda, there's like a preamble with all the sort of like key principles of planning and some of the key legislation and policies and acts that it interfaces with. So we include that as a pack. I appreciate the public probably wouldn't read it. It's how we do that really in a very concise manner that doesn't become repetitive and meaningless to people.
It's just
we'll take it away.
Yeah, it'd be worth taking it away. I think one of the suggestions might be to just get some feedback from a few councillors, because it doesn't strike me as needing to be very, very wordy. And the whole point about it is actually not being very wordy. So on a page explaining really the remit within which a planning committee operates and the process of planning, that can also potentially help point people towards pre-planning as a really good way to move. But that can be a very simple frame of words, I think, Councillor McConnell. I don't know, but you might just want to take that away as something to look at and work on.
Yeah, we certainly will.
All right, Councillor McConnell, are you happy with that?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Moving on to Councillor Howells.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Phil. Craig. I think my points have already been covered, to be quite honest. I think I was going to draw attention to the 800,000 collected fees and how's this put together and how often is it reviewed. Craig, I think you've already covered that with Councillor Cook's reply to that, so I'm happy with that. And again, similar 286 enforcement complaints and the low action rate. Is this highlighting the need for the improvement in community and town council training that's needed? Is there too much incidents of people reporting maybe unnecessary enforcements? Do we know who's doing the reporting? Is it residents, town councils or county councillors? Or are you happy for the level to carry on as it is?
Yeah, it's a mix of people who report. I wouldn't say it's too much. I think it's because what matters to one person maybe doesn't matter to another. So I think you just have to look at each case and try and explain. For instance, if there's no breach, you explain why there's no breach of planning control. The thing they've done might not have needed planning permission, you know, and then you explain. Alternatively, it could then lead to a planning application that can regularise it, or indeed, as we've said in a relatively small number of cases, a notice. So we do need those channels of communication to continue, whether it's by yourselves, the community councillors, or via members of the public or other community groups. So we're quite happy, I think, with the level we're getting. It's not. 280 may sound a lot, 286 may sound a lot for a small team of 3 officers and a manager, but ultimately I think it's something that we can manage, I think, with the resource we've got. If it was getting a lot more than that, then we'd probably start having to triage it more, wouldn't we, and set out that we can't investigate that because it's just such a minor issue, then we can't. But we're not at that level now. We'll investigate everything as thoroughly as we can.
Thanks, Phil. Just for, I'm involved with 2 town council and a community council. So, what are you going to be approaching them for training, or should I tell them to get in touch with you? Right.
Yeah, I think that's it's just reiterating this point that you've already got down as action number 4, but the lack of good understanding, I think, that you're alluding to in well-informed people in community councils and residents about enforcement, let alone about planning, is such that the more that we can we can play a role in that in our work in community councils and town councils to help set that out. But it would be possibly helpful just to have a little script that we're all sticking to, or we might all be saying different things. But okay, great, thank you very much for that. And moving on to Councillor Strong.
Thank you, Chair. I think my remarks.
I think I'm next.
Councillor Bryn, as I said earlier, I'm doing the committee members first.
Oh yeah, apologies.
I'll come to that.
Sorry, because it was about planning. I missed. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. No problem at all. But I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just trying to make sure we take the committee members first, and I'll come to you. I'll come to you at the end.
Well, apologies, Emma.
Sorry, Councillor Strong. Okay.
Yeah, my question is more directed at you, Chair, to use your influence rather than at our planning officers, whatever. It's about the issue of benchmarking. I note, and I approve of the fact that you've got a common standardised approach across different local authorities towards collecting data. But of course, it's disappointing, as you've said at the beginning of your report. But this year, that's sort of come to naught because the Welsh Government hasn't issued the figures, meaning that you can't do the benchmarking that you want. So speaking to you, Chair, on this committee, we frequently come across the issue of benchmarking, and I think we all agree that it is a very useful tool to have in evaluating our performance. But it can be difficult to get that information. Maybe it's difficult to find it from local authority details, or you have to really search for it, or different local authorities collect it in different ways. So what I'm asking is for you, perhaps in conjunction with other committee chairs and whatever, to really, I think, approach initially the Welsh Government, because I think they have the power and perhaps the duty and the facilities to collect that information and to issue it to us on different aspects of the council's work. Yeah, or maybe it's another body, maybe it's the Welsh local government agency that should be doing that. And I know we got a meeting tomorrow with them. Or maybe it's something we can do in collaboration with a number of other local authorities. Either way, I think we should look at ways of making benchmarking easier and more common. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. And I absolutely agree with you. Would you allow me to take that away and try and just check what the most effective way of trying to make the committee's view. I think we had a pre-meeting on this, and I don't think anyone did anything other than absolutely agree with your point. That we can try and make sure we get that message back to the appropriate place, and whether it's Welsh Government or the Local Government Association or not. Craig, did you want to come in on that?
Yes, thank you, Chair, if I could. Thank you, Councillor Strong, for the question. I think it's your frustrations with regards to benchmarking is exactly the same as our frustrations as officers. If you could see in the report that we haven't had that data from Welsh Government since 2019, and we want to benchmark ourselves against other authorities and know how we are comparing against other people. We are in a situation where other local planning authorities have stopped doing annual performance reports for planning. We in Monmouthshire took the decision that we want to review our work and make sure we're still working to that standard and still hitting the performance markers that we have from 2019. That's a conscious decision, and I think it's a decision that we proud of in terms of we want to keep measuring our own performance. It's not measuring our own performance though, because these are Welsh Government standards, which it's pre-set data which goes into them, but we still want to keep measuring how we are working and delivering for our residents in Monmouthshire. Going forward, we have now got this reinvigoration of the planning service, and we are in this transition period, so Welsh Government are now consulting on what that planning performance framework should be. So I will see now in the next 2-3 years that we will have that benchmarking data. We'll have a new planning performance framework, so we won't be working towards these 12 now, we'll have something different. And we are seeing a shift now, and I know we've talked a lot today about the pandemic and the impact of that, but unfortunately that did have an impact on resources within the planning service at Welsh Government level as well. So unfortunately we are where we are. I'm proud of Monmouthshire for carrying on doing the performance reviews each year, and I think in the next couple of years you will see a new planning performance framework, and you will see that benchmarking that will be in there. So hopefully we are at the start of that process. In terms of peer-to-peer reviews, if we did that, I'm more than happy to sort of explore that and look at those different options. I think the issue there is going to be around resources and funding from other planning authorities as well. Have we got the time to take that large step back? I think at the moment, now the Welsh Government are consulting on a new planning policy framework, let's get behind that, let's work within that and make that the best robust performance framework we can, so that we do have that benchmarking moving forwards.
Okay, thanks for that. I think we all appreciate the fact that you did do a report, even though it wasn't statutory to do so. And in many ways, my remarks are more about other aspects of council work than planning, because at least you do have a procedure, although you didn't get the service you wanted this year. It's good to hear it's coming in future years. Thank you.
Yeah, it's well said, and we'll do some follow-up on that. Not wanting to take away anything that you've just said, and certainly agree with the comment that Councillor Strong has made, that we really appreciate that you've made every effort to provide an informative report when you didn't have the statutory need to do so. So thank you for that. At the same time, just a gentle pushback. Could we not have been in contact with our neighbouring authorities to say, well, look, if we share our planning metrics with you, you share them with us, and we can at least have some comparative data, because some people might say it's a bit of a cop-out to say we can only compare if the Welsh Government provide us with the benchmark information. So just your brief thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would welcome the opportunity to do that ultimately. I think we'll certainly take that away, Chair, and have a look at that. I think the question is whether they've got that data, and that's the issue. In planning services, even in our neighbouring authorities, really struggling in terms of resources at the moment and just delivering services. So to get into this sort of space in terms of reviewing performance, I think for some of our neighbouring authorities is really difficult. But I can certainly take that away. I mean, hopefully next year we will be in a position where we will have that benchmarking data and be able to take it forward. But if not, then I will certainly this time next year speak to another neighbouring authority and see if we can get their figures and data and performance to present that to you, to see if that shows.
Okay, that sounds like a good way forward. Thank you for that, and appreciate your comment. Okay, moving on, and it's Councillor Pavia.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And just want to strongly endorse the comments that you made there and Councillor Strong made on benchmarking. I think it really is important that we are proactive and we seek opportunities. I appreciate what what you said, Craig, about Welsh Government consulting on its performance framework, but I don't think we should be waiting 3 years for that to be in place. I think we should be proactively going out there looking for opportunities where we can either work regionally or work with Welsh Government data that compares ourselves with other similar local authorities in Wales and explore opportunities, not just around benchmarking our performance, but also utilising peer auditing as well. I think really is important. I agree with Councillor Crook's comments on enforcement. The perception I get in terms of engagement with residents in my ward in Chepstow is that some people have lost some confidence in the council's planning function, driven by a number of reasons, and that's building outcome, lack of enforcement, fewer developers are being allowed to run roughshod over planning rules. I think that we really do need to address this, and that goes on to point of action for action point 4 that you've highlighted there in terms of improving communication and relationships with town and community councils. And it segues with the council comments, McConnell's point about, I think we should be strengthening our relationships with our communities full stop, and conducting local public seminars through the town and community councils, or getting on the agenda of local groups and societies who help us to facilitate outreach. I think we do need to explain to the public what it is the planning function does, what are the roles and remits, where are the challenges and weak points. Yes, we've got, obviously as elected councillors, we've got the opportunity to do that, but we haven't always got the platforms to do that, other than one-to-one communication with residents. And I think the outcome of the RDLP will be a hook for that, because there'll be residents across our county that will be wanting to know what the final development plan, when submitted, will mean for them and for their communities, and what does the planning function, how that facilitates that build. So I think we do need to do a bit more outreach. We do need to facilitate the capacity with our town and community councils to do that, but also work with other local groups out there as well. And if I can help do that, if I can help link you into local groups in the Chepstow area, then I'll be more than happy to do that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pavey, and that's a very well-made point, rather than a question to Craig or Phil. But I wonder, given that it would be very time-consuming for staff who we really want to focus on the work of planning, and this is part of it, it'd be very time-consuming for you to go out to all the community councils and town councils. I wonder if it would be better if we set a day where we invite the members of our community councils and town councils to come in here, and that you present to them for an hour on the issues that we're just talking about there, so that they can then disseminate them better amongst themselves. Not everyone's going to make it, but given the level of interest, then we could promote that, Councillor Pravia, in our meetings with the community councils, but maybe aim for a day that might be, I don't know, in January or something, where we set aside an hour and a half, get them in here, and if we can't get them all in one session, we'll do 2 sessions, but that might be a much better use of everybody's time, because I think we're all agreeing, and Councillor Pavias articulates it really well, that there is a big gap between the really hard work and the good work that we can say that is being done within the planning function, and the perception of it and of enforcement within communities. Well, I can't generalise too far, but certainly it sounds like that's some perception around many of the councillors in the room as well. So perhaps that's a bit of a way we could take that away, Craig, and see if that's something we could organise. Great. Moving on and back, if I may, to finally Councillor Bryn. And thank you for being patient.
It's okay, thank you. Most of the questions that I have now been covered, thankfully. Though there's some brilliant ideas, I think, about communicating, planning and enforcement rules. And I wondered if it would be also be possible to do a series of short videos that can be shared when queries come in. Because when we get email queries, if we could direct people to short videos, because that seems to be the way to go these days, and it's makes it accessible to all, I think. I've just the one question left, if that's okay. Can you tell me, are service users currently encouraged to provide formal feedback, or is feedback primarily received in the form of customer complaints? Thank you.
We used to do a customer feedback form, but I think we got such a low response rate that we stopped doing it. But it's something I think we need to think about redoing. We do get feedback, positive and negative, in the form of complaint. There was a section on feedback in the report. We felt pleased really that the level of complaints actually gone down in recent years. It got to a stage probably where there were resource gaps, I think, in the team, and there were longer delays with issues such as enforcement and planning applications. We were getting more complaints, but because we've had a fully resourced team now for the 18 months or so, I think the level of complaint in the last 2 years has really gone down. As you can see, we only got 4 stage 1 complaints last year, compared to in the teens in previous years, and we also got how many compliments? 24, I think. 24 compliments. So I think we're a bit more proactive in recognising we're getting compliments, actually reporting them as well, because we just used to say, "Oh, that was nice," and then ignore the email. We actually report them now upstairs to Annette Evans's customer relations team. They're logged, so that people are genuinely grateful, and we're not just reporting the situation where we've just done our work. It's where people are genuinely impressed that we've gone out of our way really to give them a good experience. So we push those upstairs and report those. But it is something we need to think about in terms of customer feedback and whether we send out questionnaire when we send out decision notices, perhaps. But as I say, the response was so low, it was almost getting pointless doing it, but something we can think about, I think, and maybe learn from other authorities who do it and perhaps get better response rates.
Yeah, I was just thinking you get better learning if you have constructive as well as negative feedback from users. That's all. And if you only wait, if you're not proactive in seeking feedback, you might only get negative. So I am really glad to hear that there is positive, constructive feedback coming as well as the complaints. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Brennan. It's a really good point. Part of the feedback issue is also to add some objectivity to the report, so that residents wouldn't look at a report like this and say, well, you're marking your own homework. We get some really strong feedback. So if we're actually not getting any kind of feedback when we ask for it, that's probably telling us something. It might be about the way we're going about it. It might be that you need to do a telephone call to follow up. And just have some further information that would help there. We're not the only organisation in the world that does this, and there's an effective way of doing it, I'm sure. We were talking a lot about communication and the idea of doing a video. I remember the last council I worked at, I was persuaded that what we needed to do was do a flash mob. And I don't know if anybody's ever been involved, but I agreed to it without knowing what it was. But essentially what you do is you spend 4 hours in a hall learning how to dance, a routine that you'll never dance again. And I wouldn't like to describe my version of it as dancing, but, prancing in time to the music. And then you go out and you suddenly do it in public when people are, walking around Tesco's or something with about 10 of you. And it's a surprise the effect you get, but it was all to generate interest in a particular topic area. So I reckon, Craig, Phil, I can see you as dancers. I think flash mobbers. And, Phil at the head of it, Maureen there as well, Sue, you'd be in, Emma as well. I think we've got a real chance here to have a flash mob going. So thank you for the question. Thanks for the responses. I just also wanted to highlight before we finish the within 5.1, 6.1 of the main report, we've moved to 100% electronic, or nearly 100% electronic submissions, which is really helpful moving forward for all sorts of reasons. And that the proportion of major applications determined 8 weeks or in agreed timescales are 67%, which is good in the set parameters. The proportion of all applications determined in 8 weeks is 93%, again, which is set as good by Welsh Government. Proportion of applications approved at 97%, again, set as good. And of those taking pre-application advice, as Phil heard earlier, explained earlier, is at 100%. I really just wanted to point them out because it's good performance, and it's worthwhile we pass that back to staff, Craig and Phil, if you'd be good enough to say that we read it, we see it, we recognise it, and we appreciate that. And I think part of the job that we've all got, and the service have got in particular, is to make sure that the wider public understand what good means, so they don't think we're patting ourselves on the back, but actually you're not sorting out the problem that we've got. And that's something I think that's been amplified in the room. So thank you for that. I move the report and the recommendations, and we will move on to the next item, which is Community and Corporate Plan Performance. And I think Richard and Hannah might be joining us. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Craig, in the meantime, for your responses. Thank you. Just wondering if they're going to actually start dancing on the way out, or... Well, I can't teach you any, that's for sure. I can put you in touch with somebody who can. Okay, so we're going to move straight on to the item number 6, which is Community and Corporate Plan Progress Update. And it's good to have in front of us officers and also the leader of the Council, Councillor Brocklesby, who I would ask to introduce the report. And if I also just say, I do know that you've got to rush off to another meeting, Councillor Brocklesby, so we're grateful that you've been able to join us, and we recognise that if you disappear after you finish talking, that's for a very good reason indeed, but thank you.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate the patience and forbearance of everyone on the committee, especially you, and my apologies I can't stay for the full item. I'm happy to introduce this report, the Q2 Progress Update, which I think is a key update for the Council. It's the update of our community and corporate plan, which we clearly set out the purpose of the Council to become a zero carbon county, supporting well-being, health and dignity for everyone at every stage of life. And we're committed to delivering this alongside our communities. So, councillors will remember that the annual assessment came before Council earlier this year, and it's now reports progress since then. And our ambition looks to the long term and aims to address the complex challenges facing our county and our communities. And we, as we have said all along, we don't expect to be able to solve these overnight. And in the first years, we set a clear path with the new strategies, such as our climate and nature emergency strategy, our human resources strategy, our social value procurement strategy. We've also updated our enabling strategies with relation to our medium-term financial plan and strategies, which underpin this. We brought before Council, before Cabinet, the updated measurement framework, enabling us to track progress so we can learn and adjust as we move forward. You'll remember the last time I appeared before committee to talk about the self-assessment plan. You highlighted quite rightly the need to focus on outcomes and impacts, and that is what the measurement framework sought to do. This is the first quarter in which we can measure against this. I would certainly welcome your views and suggestions, because we need to adapt as we go along and ensure the outcomes we are tracking are the right one, as very dynamic events that are happening around us, both globally and in the UK, may change our ability for good or for bad in our ability to meet our proposed targets. We cannot carry out a full self-assessment of progress during 2023 to 24. That assessment was considered by the committee, as you know, back in July, ahead of me presenting it to full council. The full self-assessment is an in-depth process involving workshops in the directorates. This is a much lighter date one, but does show where we're progressing against our measurement framework. It's focused on the 6 objectives by which we are carrying out our purpose, and you will find those listed in paragraph 3.1 of the report. I look forward to watching this online and reflecting on the Cabinet's reflecting on your views and feedback on progress made so far. And I'm going to hand over to Richard and Hannah. But if you want to ask me any direct questions before I leave, I'm more than happy to take them.
Thank you, Councillor Brocklesby. And if there are any questions for Councillor Brocklesby, then could you let us, or let Councillor Brocklesby know, please? Sorry, I've just lost the... okay, so I suppose one question that I would have, Councillor Brocklesby, is trying to... I appreciate very much that there's more about delivery, and that is a step change, which is helpful to see. I just wonder, is there more that we can do to remove the perception that we are marking our own scorecard? We've had 3 reports today where there hasn't been benchmark information, there hasn't been regional information, there hasn't been national information, and we're looking at basically what we say about ourselves, and in some cases marking ourselves accordingly. And it's so looking at this report, this is in common with that, and I just wonder if you had any comment on that, how we can make the a report in future as objective as residents might wish to see it.
Thanks, Councillor Neil, Chair. I fully take your point. I do think we need benchmarking, some of which the data is available, and sometimes the data isn't available. But our ability to include it is a well-founded suggestion, and I think we should look at it going forward as we are thinking about the trend towards the measurement indicators that we've set. We should be able to note that progress and note it against other councils. I can give you one example on waste management, where I'm delighted that we are, depending on how you look at the benchmarking, we're either joint number 2 across Wales or number 3. That's a fantastic place to be in, and I'm sure you'd join with me in congratulating our officers. But at the same time, we need to know the benchmark when we're not doing so well, so that we can reach out and learn from experiences from other councils. The self-assessment one is an interesting one in itself. It's in that it's a statutory duty of every council in Wales to perform this self-assessment, and we do so until the peer assessment, which officers will come in and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're due to have our peer assessment in 2025, in January.
Yeah, just right. We need to firm up the exact date, but yes, it'll be late 2025.
And this is an opportunity to have an objective external assessment where councillors, of course, will be consulted by peer assessment panel, and they set their agenda, not me or cabinet. So we do have, within the self-assessment programme, we do have that benchmarking, and we do have that ability for objective assessment from outside. In the wider picture, Councillor Neil, we need to look at the report back across all our policies, across our financial planning, across the budget update, because those are ones in which we go into the detail and where we are really, and it depends on our the chairs of each of our scrutiny committees where you want to do the deep dive, and it is that, I think, which enables us to have the accountability. I'm not saying this is a superficial document, it's not, and neither is the self-assessment, but truly to understand what's going on in schools and education. I believe you've had a report on inclusion, requires those in-depth reports and that in-depth scrutiny on particular issues, particular objectives. But thank you for asking, and it is something that we should seriously consider, and I hope you don't have to ask that question again next time, Chair.
No, I appreciate it, and thanks for engaging very much with that. I know that's something that you're keen to do. The reports that we've had, it's not at all to fail to recognise that if the information isn't out there, then it's it's a question of, well, you don't have the information to benchmark. But what we've been talking about, and actually we've raised it quite a lot over the last couple of years, is that this very thing about peer reviews could be done on a smaller version, with neighbouring authorities, potentially 2 or 3 neighbouring authorities agreeing as a cluster to have shared and reciprocated engagement with officers or other members to take a look at what's going on in a particular area, to lend another view, and it can help to present something in a more objective way, a sort of mini peer approach to it, which can be very valuable. But really appreciate that's something that that you will be looking at. That's very helpful.
With regards with working more closely, cross-learning with officers and cabinet members, also councillors within our region, that has very much started. We now have routine cabinet-to-cabinet meetings with Torfaen and Blaenau Gwent. You can imagine the difficulties we have in getting the diaries aligned for all cabinet members of all three councils, but nevertheless, we're now approaching our fourth meeting, I believe. Underpinning that is officers take forward those discussions. I take your point that it's something that we could ensure where there's news to share, we can bring it to council to share. Many of these discussions are taken forward in small ways which are really beneficial in how we work together, and you'll know in revenues and benefits we have a very well established joint working with Torfaen, which works extremely well with SRS. Don't ask me what that stands for, but it is our shared IT. That's working and has worked really well, and together we're looking at ways in which SRS can do more than just IT support, but work on data management, data analysis, which improves everything that we're doing. That's ongoing, and will get reported back to council on our annual report around digital and data.
It's shared response services.
I knew you'd know, Phil.
That's what people can do, isn't it?
I was chair of it for a long time. So.
And well chaired, I'm sure.
Great, thank you, Councillor Brogsby. And I know we've taken more of your time than you were able to give, so appreciate your holding back. And we'll move on with the item. Appreciate it.
I can only apologise for not staying chair, because I do think it's important.
Yeah, that's great. No problem at all. We understand. Great stuff. So we discussed just before this item began that there is a deteriorating weather situation outside. So I'm asking with Richard and Hannes forbearance if we go straight into questions, and that we take those before we move to the next item. So just looking to see if there are any questions that colleagues have got. There's one that I did have, which is in regards to the amount of, I was just looking for it, we had the number of businesses assisted in a thriving and ambitious place. It had declined by 75%. Which I thought was an extraordinary number, and one that raises obvious concerns, in terms of the Monmouthshire economy. And I just wonder if there's anything that, Richard, that you can enlighten us on regard to that.
Probably a little bit of context of the number, Chair. Firstly, these are obviously measures reported to you in the 6-month stage during the year with a number such as this, where it's the accumulation of pre-start and existing businesses we support through the year. The actual previous period there is an annual figure, so covering the full 12 months of 23-24. The latest there, the 42, is covering 6 months, but recognising the point in terms of that, even if you just play that forward, it would still be lower than the target set, but I think that's important to recognise. We expect to see an increase in that when we get 4 years of the data, and that will make that comparison back to the previous period more meaningful, and indeed the target. But I think we recognise it in the progress update, the work that has been done to support businesses, and also that being an area in terms of continuing that offer to businesses during the next 6 months of the year as well. So hopefully that's just a bit of clarification to the context.
That's very helpful, because sometimes you only get the full picture with the full 12 months. So in other words, that we should expect that to improve by the time we get to the end of the full year. We'll have a look at that closely. Councillor Howells.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Richard and Hannah. I just one point really. I couldn't see in the report the work that Monmouthshire Food Partnership are doing with the 3 farms on regenerative farming. is it in there? Sort of, I think it's quite an important issue, and the good work that the team are doing there.
Absolutely, I think you're right to highlight that important work. I think one of our objectives is focus on supporting Monmouthshire to be a fair place to live, about supporting access to healthy and sustainable food is one of the priorities. Clearly, within this objective, of progress work, we focused on some of the significant areas within, which particularly relate to the measurement framework. Not saying that isn't important, we just probably can't fit everything in within a succinct report to scrutiny. But I think it's a good point to reflect on when we look at self-assessing against that wider outcome. The outcomes from that project are certainly ones when we get, to the next 6-month report, we'll look to bring in and review the impact that has had. I think it's just a matter of fitting all the good work in one report. We've got to be focused in terms of some of the activity during the year. Our self-assessment report at the year end, where we'll work across directorates to assess our performance, will allow us to bring in, make sure that's reflected on the projects. It's not undermining the importance of that project, recognising we try to be focused in this report.
Kes, how's it okay with that? I just have one other last question, which is on the Fair Place to Live objective. Do we have any understanding of why the free school meal uptake is lower in areas of deprivation? Because that does appear to be counter to what might be expected, but just to understand that better.
Yeah, I think that's probably one, Chair, we refer back to the team to give you a fuller understanding. I think what I can say from the report is that clearly it's being monitored and tracked. The universal free school meal provision has been implemented, but uptake is still being tracked, and looking at then how to support that increasing uptake is something that the survey is looking at. And some of those reasons, I think, are probably their best place to provide you and the committee with a response.
Could I ask you to pass that one through, just to understand that, unpack it a little bit, because it's such an important area?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. It looks like we have no further questions on this item, so I'm going to say thank you for the report. I move the report and the recommendations that go with it, and performance of the first 6 months of the report. So thank you, Richard. Thank you, Hannah. And we'll move on to the item number 7, which is the Forward Work Programme. Was there anything, Robert, that you wanted to add to that?
Just very quickly, please, Chair. You should have had an email just about Governance and Audit Committee briefing sessions, one on corporate insurance, one on emergency planning, in November and January, respectively. Just in case you haven't seen it, you should have had it in your emails if that's something that you'd like to attend.
Yeah, that popped up, so I'm sure colleagues will be looking at that one. And okay, moving on to the action list. Was there anything on the action list, Robert, that we needed to do there to be determined?
Yeah, just also the first one has had an answer come through definitively, which was sent directly to Councillor Bond, but just to let members know, because there was a question about the consultancy spend, whether it was 4 million or 1.7 and 1.27, and it was 1.27, so that was clarified.
Right. Okay, thank you. Okay, so moving on to item number 8, which is the Standard Cabinet and Council Planner for Information, and number 9, to confirm the minutes of the 3 meetings that we had in October, and thank you everybody who attended all 3. But is there any comment or any correction from any member? I see none. So those stand, and we will sign those off. And just to say, item number 10, the next meeting is on the 3rd of December. Can you even believe it? We're talking about December. Where did that come from? It was summer a couple of minutes ago. But okay, so we'll see you on the 3rd of December. Thank you everybody for attending, and I draw the meeting to a close.